Good afternoon. Thank you all for coming out today. We're here to release the findings and recommendations of the Wichita Police Department organizational assessment. I'm going to give you the roster of the people who are going to present and be part of the Q&A. Misty Bruckner from Wichita State is going to present a PowerPoint. City Manager Robert Layton is going to talk about the search for the police chief and give you some details about some upcoming community meetings related to this assessment. And then we have the interim police chief, Nelson Mosley, here, along with two deputy chiefs, Hassan Ramza and John Spear, who are very involved with the assessment. So, Misty?
Very good. Thank you for being here today. I'm Misty Bruckner, the Director of the Center of Urban Studies at Wichita State University, and I just want to recognize a few folks before we get started. First, thank the City Council and for City Manager Bob Layton for this opportunity to participate in this. I also want to thank Dr. Michael Berger, who's the Director of the School of Community Affairs and Professor of Criminal Justice, and Dr. Andy Bannister, who's the Regional Community Policing Training Institute and Professor of Criminal Justice. And they'll both assisted with this project and content expertise, research, and just overall guidance for this. So they'll be available here today also. And then Stephanie Knabel was a project assistant on this and added a lot to that. So I will go ahead and get started with kind of the overall effort and tell you what we did. Our purpose for the assessment was twofold. First, we were charged with looking at the recommendations for the selection process for the next chief of police. We're also trying to provide an overall blueprint for what that chief of police should be considering and kind of the major issues for the department. We were asked specifically to look at 4 areas in this. One, we're conducting best practice research, specifically looking at racial profiling and community policing that Dr. Berger and Dr. Bannister led. We engaged internal and external stakeholders on the state of the department. We reviewed critical information from the department. And then last, we were charged with making recommendations for the selection of the next chief. We met with approximately 20 to 25 external stakeholder groups. They were law enforcement partners, community groups, special interest groups. Then we had just general community organizations, either that called that we did focus groups with, or we had one open focus group session too. In addition, we did internal focus groups with non-commissioned and commissioned police personnel. We invited a total of 275 folks. We had about 25% attend a focus group meeting. It was a random selection process done by rank, and they all participated in focus groups. At the focus groups, whether those were internal or external, they were asked the same 10 standard questions. One of the things we were trying to identify was how people internally, externally see the world differently. So from that information, we recorded all of those notes, and then we went back through all of that quantitative and kind of impression information and tried to quantify any of that information. So these items that you see here are kind of the top themes that we were able to quantify through those remarks and coding. So strengths of the department are the quality staff, was continuously mentioned. Community policing, especially the philosophy of the community policing. There's some questions on the deployment or how effective in some areas, but definitely the philosophy was supported from both internal and external. And then specialty units. Department is recognized just not locally, but across the state and nation for some of their specialty units. Weaknesses, training, communication, both internal and external, recruitment, and then the use of technology are consistent themes that you will see. We also asked 2 questions on strengths and weaknesses of the leadership. The strength of the leadership was strong ties and historical ties with partnering with law enforcement agencies. There is a lot of information on the transition leadership team and on good service that they had provided. And then community policing again. The weaknesses, communication and training came up, and then the other one, primarily from the internal, but also from external folks, where the discipline and then professional standards were an issue. We asked the same questions related to community relations, strength again, our community policing, but as also special programs. Specifically mentioned were like the mental health type of progress, the homeless task force, some of those that go in to work with special populations. Weaknesses for community relations were communication and then community policing and relationship with specific community groups were identified as a challenge. Tangible improvements, the last question really got to, in 2 years, if we came back and had these conversations again, what would be the expectations for change? And those same themes carried through for this also. Training, technology, recruitment, communications, and community relations would be the expectations for the next chief of police. So we took all of this information and we divided it in 2 areas, community relation type of issues and then more internal administrative issues. And our next challenge is we'd heard a lot of perceptions about what was going on. We tried to match that with as much data that we could to either confirm or to at least provide some additional information to the issues. So on community relations, one of the first items that we looked at was community policing. There is a lot of support from the outside, the involvement of officers in the community, and trying to think of ways that could be improved upon. There's some concern about the model for how the deployment of community policing is in Wichita, is as a kind of a standalone officers in unit, is something that should be investigated to try to develop a more holistic approach, maybe move away from the beat coordinators and maybe be more agile and think about the needs of the specific neighborhoods and how that might look different for one part of the community to the next. You have to balance that with making sure that people have a community liaison, someone they talk to, someone they know where to go to, someone who will be there for them to answer questions, which has been a strong suit for the department. Other recommendations are looking at hiring a forward-thinking chief who embraces this community policing philosophy, thinking about how you integrate community policing with all other aspects of the department also, increasing training on the philosophy, as well as how do you implement that to make sure it's integrated, whether that's through hiring, promotions, all of that effort that needs to happen. So thinking about how we change this, there needs to be a lot more conversations about this. So developing some type of a transition team of community stakeholders, internal stakeholders to think about what's the next phase for community policing for our community? What's the next effort? Body cameras, there's been a lot in the news with that, and really our recommendation was to continue with the implementation plan as submitted and to communicate that progress regularly with the community. Mental health is another issue that we heard a lot about, and the department has done work with that area. Some of our recommendations include trying to develop an implementation plan for all officers, setting some targets, expanding the training opportunities. Right now it's fairly limited on the number of officers that can go through. Work with the mental health community to talk about changes and current topics and trends that they are seeing for that. Racial profiling was another hot topic that we looked at, and one that our professors did a lot of research on, as well as community policing. One of the main recommendations to think about the racial profiling training, to make it much more hands-on, to make it about fair and impartial police training, to make it a more adult learner type of approach where people are actively engaged in the conversation and participation. Inviting in members from the minority community to be active in the police training, to create dialogue and to create understandings from both sides, and to think about that just in general, the diversity training that is needed, looking at best practices from others, and then just making sure you're communicating what are our standards, what are our policies that we have so that the public is aware of that information. The pretext stop, going along with the racial profiling, again, trying to think about the information that needs to be shared with the public on this, and then making sure that the policies and the training are supportive and reinforce the objective of what the pretext stop should and can be used for. In addition, the police department is currently updating their policies to try to provide more communication or an incident report at the time, so that you're documenting what is going on. So both the citizens who might be involved with the pretext stop have information on what the reason was, as well as officers have a record of what those facts and details of that pretext stop were. And then lastly, with that, is to make sure there's some type of ongoing review from professional standards about the policy and the implementation of these incidents. Another area that we heard about was the reflection of the community, and does the department reflect the demographic makeup of the community? Obviously, there are more white and more males on the department than representative of the community at large. Hispanics and female are probably the biggest gap. But when you look at a labor force study, it's actually more reflective of the labor pool, and the police force are actually fairly reflective. The importance here, though, is how do you try to address that discrepancy through recruitment, through mentoring programs, through support systems once those folks are in the place, and how are you keeping the diversity issue in front of the department at all times. Another theme that we heard as an issue was the external communication and internal communication too. Some of the recommendations for that are including a standardized approach on significant issues for the department, proactive educational campaign. One of the findings that we had was both internal and external. People were hungry to share the information as well as to receive information on why the department and officers do the things that they do. What are the procedures? What are the policies? Why does that happen? Looking at additional resources for public information assistance, so an area where we think there could be more support is to have somebody who works on communication, who would not be a commissioned officer, but who could assist the department with that, as well as supporting volunteer type of programs, because many of the volunteer programs have waned or are no longer existing, and it's a great way to reach out to the community for that. And then holding regular, semi-regular community meetings with minority communities and discussing racial profiling and other hot conversations, making sure that you're having those open discussions and are available. One of the big areas for discussion was thinking about a police department advisory board. Our recommendation is to look at establishing a new department advisory board to serve as a representative of the community to the department on critical community and department issues. And so this is a proactive approach to engage community members to work with the department on important items for the department and for community relations. We want to make sure that both perspectives are heard, but more importantly that you're having some discussion and conversation in a way that is impactful. We would also recommend using a subset of that advisory board to serve as a standing committee as a city manager's review board to hear cases of officer conduct for that. For the advisory board, we'd recommend at least 15 to 20 members, final appointments made by the manager, and that there be extensive training that goes on so folks understand police protocols, understand the policies and environment, as well as starting to build those relationships with the community. We'd recommend that this be reviewed in 18 months to see if it is effective and what we hope that it would be doing. For the city manager review board, they will review cases concerning professional and administrative conduct. If the citizen agrees with the findings of professional standards, that they can appeal to this board. And a difference that exists now that we want to highlight is it will also hear direct requests from the citizens. So the citizen can go to this board and share their concern. And in addition, the advisory board and the review board could also bring cases forward to the police department. And all of these would be reviewed by the professional standards, and those findings would be brought back out. The City Manager Review Board will review those reports and findings. And another significant change is to have an opportunity for discussion and dialogue on that, right? Now there's a report and the conversation ends, but to try to get understanding of and clarity on those issues. If the City Manager Review Board disagrees with professional standards findings, they may ask for additional information, investigation, contacting other witnesses, data, trying to get a better understanding of what's going on. After that additional investigation, the information will be shared with the Chief of Police. And then another significant change is the Review Board will have the opportunity to sit down with the Chief of Police to talk about those findings. So it could result in a different outcome on the case for discipline or for those involved, or it could not change. But upon meeting with the Review Board and the Chief, if the Review Board agrees with the findings of the Police Department, the case would end. If they do not agree with the Police Department, then that case and information would go on to the City Manager for a final decision. Some of the administrative issues that we looked at were the change in, one of the things we heard from officers was just the priorities of the department and the workload effort that goes along with that. So we looked at some data, trying to see what we could learn about that. What we know is that dispatched calls decreased between 2009 and 2014, but there was an increase in some of the calls that are type E or priority E or priority 1, which are the more dangerous and high-profile types of crimes. There's been increases in there. Priority 2 and 3 types of calls have decreased. Priority 4 calls, which are calls that go to the case desk, which are more after type of reports, has decreased significantly, and the priority 5 calls have increased by 73%. Priority 5 calls are kind of the special assignment calls, or special assignments, excuse me, that get categorized that way. So when folks are pulled off to maybe look at a lot of larceny going on in a neighborhood or burglaries going on in a neighborhood, that gets classified as priority 5. So it is a special assignment for that. So the challenge is balancing this, because we know the special assignments are also effective, that they have had good results in using that. It's the challenge of balancing that with the response time that is needed on some of those other calls, and those seem to be increasing. The other kind of part of this conversation is just looking directly at response time, and we know that actual response time has increased from 2008 to 2013, and you compare it with the national benchmarking from the International City County Management Association, that we are above that. One more thing that's an indicator of workload is just the overtime. It kind of peaked in 2012, but still you're looking at a 20% increase from 2008 till 2014. So all of these indicate what we heard was about what are the priorities, the workload, what do we do with that information. So our recommendations including completing a workload assessment or time study. These officers have a lot of responsibilities, not just responding to calls, but the paperwork, the reports that are required for them, the follow-up type of conversation. So how are officers using time? What can be learned from effectiveness with that? We also recommend completing a staffing analysis to ensure that we have the appropriate allocation of resources for the department and that it's being deployed. So it's more than just number of officers per population, but also when are those calls coming in, how are their officers assigned, what parts of the community, and there are firms that do that type of work, and we would recommend that. We think an important thing is just to communicate trends of all of this information internally and to the public, and then to just drill down a little bit. This is, when we looked at those priority calls, I think there's a lot more information about those changes and percentages, and so what more do we need to learn from that? Another big topic was the leadership and the leadership transition. So one of the things that we looked at for data-wise was just to look at time and tenure in positions. And we know in the last 5 years, we've had all new deputy chiefs, but we have also had 90% of our captains have changed, 39, almost 40% of lieutenants, almost 50% of sergeants, and 40% of detectives are in new roles. Now they all have tenure and experience with the department, I'm grateful for, but these are still new roles and new leadership responsibilities. So recommendations include developing a leadership and management program to help support the department and develop that next generation. We know just societal and trend-wise with what's going on in the workforce that they will continue to lose officers due to retirement. Thanking and recognizing examples of outstanding leadership and communicating that, and then hiring the next chief of police that values personal development and professional development and has a proven record of doing that. Another item that we heard internally but also externally was traffic accidents. About 15 years ago, the department transitioned out of having a separate traffic unit, and so there was a concern from the accidents, but also the time it takes for officers to work those cases and the best use of their resources, the impact that it has to the community as far as the cleanup time, and most importantly, just the safety of the community. So we looked at traffic accidents just as a whole in comparison to other communities. We also looked at injuries per 10,000 of population to try to get a little better comparison. And both of these led to the fact that there probably is room for improvement. Whether that's a standalone traffic unit, I think deserves further study and what that would look like as far as actually having an impact on accidents and to increase or improve the time that it takes to clean up and resolve these accidents would be the other part of it. Another issue that we heard about was the discipline, especially going through professional standards and an impression of what was going on there. So we looked at internal, so issues of professional standards conduct that came through the department, and then concerns from the outside, external complaints. So what we saw is actually a decrease from internal complaints from 2009 to 2013. From about 161 to about 111. At the same time, what we know with those internal complaints that the vast majority of them are sustained, or they are found that there was an issue or concern with the conduct of the officer, and relatively small on the other areas. So we looked at this from the external complaints results in officer conduct too. We have found that has remained fairly steady. There's a few spikes and increases, but over a 5-year time period, it's remained fairly steady for that. We then looked about whether or not these issues were sustained or not sustained. These complaints were sustained or not sustained. And you can see, well, the majority are unfounded or there was not information there to support that. There is a sustained and is also as a part of this conversation too of when those items are investigated by the department. Our recommendations on discipline is creating some transparency for all involved, for internally as well as the external community, so they understand what's going on with these officer conduct type of cases and what those findings are. Looking at the effectiveness of the department's discipline code and seeing if it's actually having the desired outcome. These are to change behaviors and to make officers behavior accountable and productive to see if that is effective. And then looking at the department's training capacity, management, and to also look at development and training for a timely manner. One of the things we talked about is what can be done at the supervisor and frontline training that can be done through coaching, mentoring, and at the field services instead of going through professional conduct process. The other part of this that we looked at on the discipline was just the timeliness, both from the inside and the outside. We heard about the timeliness factor. And during the summer and then this fall, the department has been working on a system where even if there's a criminal investigation going on, the conduct of the officer can be investigated. So it's a bifurcated or two-pronged approach to the investigation, which I think will help with the timeliness of those investigations. A big issue for the department, not unique to Wichita, but is just the recruitment effort for officers. And what we know from 2011 to 2014 is it's dropped about 55% for the officers who have made it through that first round application. So initial screening and books, and there's been a significant drop-off for that. This is not unique to Wichita. There's communities across the country that have had much higher drops in recruitment efforts, and so, but it's a huge concern, especially when you look at retirement and tenure and what will happen to replace those officers. So our recommendations really look at trying to figure out what's going on, why are officers not getting through, what are we looking at for those that did, what can we learn from them, looking at internal WPD training, FOP, HR, to talk about that, holding focus groups with the communities to learn from them, analyzing the impact of the current marketing efforts. Are we really reaching the people who might be interested in going into law enforcement? Much more targeted approach for that, marketing plan, materials, and thinking about at what age we need to be reaching those folks to get into public safety and public service work. And so this is an area where we think the department can use more resources to help them with this. Training, I think both external and internal thought this was an issue to how do we get better training for our officers. So one of the first step is looking at the facility and getting that issue addressed of where the new training facility will be. Identifying external resources that can be used at a reduced cost for training. So there's a lot of internal training that goes on right now, but what might exist for external resources. Creating a continuous supervisor and leadership training, partnering with other external law enforcement, and then hiring a non-commissioned staff person to provide consistency, someone who specializes in training and development and for adult learning. Interagency relations are strong, historically, a suit of the department. We met with Wichita Police Department and Sedgwick County Sheriff to talk about potential opportunities for the future of how they might work together. Some of the top areas for consideration would be co-locating narcotics, co-location of property and evidence, co-location of records section. Again, these are all benefits to the community and to the citizens, so they don't have to go to two different places, that they might have be able to get the information they need or the property that is theirs back in a more timely manner. Looking at a shared polygraph position at the training center, thinking of technology, ways to share that, and then again, the leadership and management training, what we can do there. We talked a little bit about the Brady-Giglio impact and whether an officer is fit for duty under this law. There is an evolving conversation, so making sure that we're monitoring that at the national level, initiating a fit for duty screening for officers who have been determined by the district attorney to have negative credibility, and then trying to develop a plan for that and working with the FOP to finalize the status of those officers. Okay, our final area is what do we do for the next chief of police? Responsive from focus groups, whether those are interviews, one-on-one, external, internal, was to really to look at the excellent communication skills, proven leader in a metro environment, ethical and professional beyond reproach, and creating a healthy relationship with community and partners and with internal staff also. What kind of the qualities that continue to shine up. The recommendations that we gave to the manager based on best practices and kind of national trends was to engage a firm that specialized in the hiring of a chief of police, to establish a community advisory committee that could assist the manager as the managers hire, but to make sure there's community input. Once the finalists are identified, to make sure there is an extensive internal and external engagement process that allows for feedback for the finalists. So during doing conversations with the community, so the community can get to know the candidates and be able to provide feedback, and doing the same kind of process internally as well, so that internally they have feedback on that. And then making sure they conduct a thorough background check of whoever is the finalist to ensure you have the best candidate and best fit for your organization. All right, I think that's what I have.
Good afternoon, everybody. I want to thank the entire Wichita State University team that helped put this report together. It's extensive, and it met the objectives that I established back last fall when I asked for the assessment to be done. Just a reminder, the idea was that we would have a blueprint prepared for the new chief when that person takes office, and I think we have that in this document. It's believe it or not, Misty just touched on pieces of the report. It's very extensive in its recommendations. I want to thank everyone in the community that provided input, both those in our department as well as all of those who took the time to be interviewed either in focus groups or in individual interviews. Many of the people that are here today represent some of the groups that have had an ongoing interest in police community relations. Right before we go into Q&A, I'd like them to introduce themselves so that you know who's up here and that you also have the ability to ask them about their opinions on the recommendations as they've just been outlined. A couple of things. First of all, I plan on putting together an implementation team to take these recommendations, make sure that all the recommendations that are included in the report are summarized, and that we then work with our project management office and our police department to work diligently on moving forward with the recommendations. Some of them can be done or accomplished in a short term, even before a new chief is hired. Some of them will require a longer period of time for work. We'll prepare quarterly reports then in terms of the status of our activities in that regard. And those will be available both internally and for the community. In terms of the selection of a new police chief, now that we have the blueprint, I'm ready to move forward with that process, as I said I would. I'm hoping by the end of next week that I'll have selected a search firm to help us through the process. Again, taking the recommendations and advice from WSU, I'll be looking for a firm that has focused on police chief recruitment in the past and has extensive experience in that regard. I also then, in the next 30 days, intend to appoint the community advisory group that will be assisting in that process, so they'll be able to work with the selected consultant from the very beginning in terms of the job description and the search materials that will be put together for the search. We've been told by the firms that have done this in the past that it's a 4 to 6 month process, especially when you have the kind of community participation that is being recommended and that I anticipate. I think the important thing is that we get a good candidate pool and that we select someone that that the community is comfortable with, and that that person has the skill sets to be able to move us in the direction that is outlined in the blueprint that came from everyone in the community. The other thing I wanted to mention is that the rollout of this plan doesn't stop here today, but we've had 4 community-based organizations that have agreed to receive a presentation from us and also to let their meetings be open to the public so that others can participate in that process. We have one of those scheduled already. The Wichita branch of the NAACP will be conducting its meeting on March 10th at its offices or its headquarters at 2821 East 24th Street. Also, Sunflower Community Action has agreed to host one of the meetings. Wichita Independent Neighborhoods has, and the Wichita Crime Commission has also agreed. So we have 4 organizations that will have community meetings. With that, I will, I guess maybe, first of all, if we can have everyone that's here, I think you know the mayor and council members, so we probably don't have to introduce them. But if the others that are here can introduce themselves, they also are familiar with the recommendations and, as I said, represent some of the groups that have had a long-standing interest in moving this issue forward. Maybe Pastor Moore.
I'm Bishop Wade Moore, the president of the Greater Wichita Ministerial League.
I'm Dewan Wash, Director of Communications for Sunflower Community Action.
I'm Chris Steinkamp. I'm the president of the Wichita Crime Commission.
Stephanie McCurdy, I'm the interim executive director for the Wichita Crime Commission and Crime Stoppers in Suffolk County.
PJ Zamorano, president, Fraternal Order Police.
Hans Asmussen, Vice President, Fraternal Order Police.
Andy Cox, Wichita Branch NAACP President.
I'm Mark McCormick. I'm the Executive Director of the Kansas African American Museum.
John Spearman, Deputy Chief on the Police Department, and myself and Deputy Chief Ramsey were the liaison with WSU and the Police Department.
Sam Renzo, Deputy Chief of the Department.
Ruben Eccles, Deputy Director of Sunflower Community Action.
Reverend Dr. Kevin Harding, lead pastor, Delrose.
take questions and answers right now. Just ask your questions and the appropriate speaker will come up.
A significant amount of changes have been suggested. Any idea how much it'll cost to put a lot of these into play? I mean, how do you budget for some of these changes?
The short answer is no. That will be part of the implementation work that we do. Some of the items, if you remember, there was a discussion about additional study. We anticipate we'll probably bring someone in that's an expert from the outside on the staffing study. Mayor and City Council have asked for that work over the last few months, and so that'll dovetail with what was recommended by WSU, and we'll be building that into our operating budget. Some of the other items I think can be implemented with little or no additional cost, but we'll put that together, and I would guess after the first quarter, when we get to the first quarterly report, we'll have a better idea on the cost with some of these recommendations.
Take no questions from media?
Is it okay for media to ask questions?
Yes.
Okay. So I guess, Paul, are you kind of surprised by any of the findings as far as, discipline, community policing, that sort of thing?
I think if I had any surprise, it was how close the input was from the police department input and the community input. Everybody seemed to be in general alignment in that regard. The issue of communication and the need for more communication both inside the department and outside the department, that was common. The discussion about the value of community policing, that's not necessarily surprising, but it's universal through the community. That seems to be one of the things that's a defining character or quality for us, something that makes us maybe unique and that our community doesn't want us to lose. At the same time, that there seemed to be universal agreement that we needed to rejuvenate community policing and determine what that new model is going forward for Wichita. So I'm excited about that. And then in terms of the feedback on the police chief, there seemed to be, again, agreement both from internal and external participants that we do an exhaustive search and that we look at internal candidates as well as external candidates. They wanted, and that we have a broad-based selection process. So I think, I don't know that any of those are surprises other than there seemed to be a lot of alignment on those recommendations.
In regards to that review board that people can bring their complaints to,
Right.
who will that board be made up of? Is it just regular citizens, or do you know that?
I don't know yet, and that's one of the things, and in consultation with the mayor and city council, we'll start talking about what that should, what the membership should be comprised of. It needs to be a good cross-section of the community. And I know some people have criticized me for saying this, but we need to have the usual and the unusual voices, right? Those who not always felt represented in the process, so they need to be there as well so that it has credibility in the community. And I'm looking forward to, we'll ask for nominations, both self-nominations and organizations at some point coming up once we are ready to determine what that makeup should be. And we'll then try to winnow the number down.
As far as recruitment,
Yeah.
I was going to ask about recruitment real quick.
Yeah.
Talk about changing some marketing strategy. What can the city and the department do to recruit more minorities to join the police force?
Well, Chief, I don't know if you want to talk a little bit about this because there has been some discussion in the community or in the department already about that. This is an issue that is difficult nationwide. So what we're seeing is that we're having a hard time getting qualified recruits, and then to make sure that the recruits we get are reflective of the demographics in the community. So, but I'll let the chief talk a little bit more.
As the manager has stated, this is nothing new to Wichita. I mean, recruitment are issues throughout this country. Right now, what we've done internally are talked about our focus groups, minority groups, military, and I think also in the PowerPoint presentation as to when should you start, at what age. But what we are wanting to focus on is our community. Obviously, we have to mirror our community, and that's what we want to do. There's a lot of ideas out there about how to do that. If it was a one-size-fit-all, we'd be in there right now. But right now, me and my management team are looking at all options. If there's suggestions from the community as well, we'll take that as well.
Are you worried at all in light of what's happened with the recent events in Ferguson and some other places? Is it harder to reach out to the African-American community to get that trust to have them become a police officer?
Well, I don't know that we can put it to that one event, because if you look at our chart, it was declining over time, even before that event. Would that have something, some play to do with it? It could. But right now, what we're focusing in on our community is dialogue. I mean, a theme throughout this presentation was also communication, open dialogue, and looking out there. And that's part of what we're wanting with the department. And we're engaging our citizens, our community as well in this topic.
One thing I just wanted to add is that the sponsoring organizations for No Ferguson Here and the hearings that we had, or the public discussions we had, we've committed as a partner of that group to have ongoing discussions about issues related to the police department. And at our most recent meeting, we talked about this issue of recruitment and what can we do together to come up with some solutions. Some of it's going to start with at an early age and getting people to appreciate those that are even in high school to appreciate law enforcement as a career, and what can we do to reach out to those students to get them interested, and then what can we do for those that are more of the recruitable age. And I anticipate that we'll have some continuing dialogue on that, so we can come up with some unique strategies that fit Wichita uniquely.
Bob, just talking about that, talking about traffic accidents you did and the traffic units.
Yes.
And I don't know if this is more for the chief, but as far as getting rid of that traffic unit, how important is it, or is it important to get that unit back? I know the number of accidents have increased, including motorcycle accidents. You know, is there any thought on reinstating that?
As extensive as this report was, it wasn't exhaustive, right? And so what you saw were some basic statistics, but we don't know how we're going to go forward in terms of, I think the recommendation was that we need to study further what was happening in terms of the number of accidents or incidents, and then we need to talk about what the best practice would be in order to address that. But I do think there's a commitment that we put more resources into some type of systematic approach to traffic enforcement. And that's, again, that will be one of the recommendations that we pursue as the team. So I don't have anything exactly set up today. Yeah. Do we have other media? Michael?
I had a couple of questions about the subpoena.
Yes, yes.
One, will it have subpoena power?
And I don't want to put words in WSU's mouth, so I'll let Misty talk about that if she'd like. They did look at the issue of subpoena power, found it a little more difficult for enforcement of those subpoenas, and so I think that's why they focused on this issue of a dynamic relationship between the review board and professional standards. Today, it's almost like a judicial hearing. Evidence is presented and then they make a finding. I believe that the strength of this recommendation is there is a relationship and an ongoing discussion back and forth. And if the review board wants more information, they will work with professional standards. They have that ability to have a dialogue to better understand what they're being presented, and then have the opportunity to just sit down with the chief. And none of that really exists in today's process. So the idea is to have that dynamic relationship so that we can get, I think, the kind of feedback that people are asking for.
And then the second question is, do you think that perhaps limiting the review board to only being able to look at situations that professional standards has agreed to investigate or has already completed their investigation on might actually limit that board unfairly? And I say this because perhaps, maybe an investigation has been ongoing for 2 years. I know these, investigations can be delayed.
Right.
And then they say, oh, well, we can't let you look at this because we're still investigating it. Or they may decide not to investigate a situation. Would there be any way for the review board to look at situations that the department decided not to investigate?
We'll be working with the advisory board to determine what the parameters are for the review board. I think the recommendation from WSU does allow a resident to bring an issue, or for the board to bring an issue to the chief and talk about it and to ask for investigation. It'll be up to the chief then, working with them to determine next steps. But I think the idea is to have that productive relationship and ongoing discussion. I'm going to guess that there are many items that will never reach a review board, but instead will come through the advisory board. The idea of that advisory board is not just to review rules and regulations, but to spend time talking about how do we continue to strengthen the relationship between the police department and the community. How do we recognize the things that are happening in the community that we can advance through, additional police work. For instance, we have the initiative on database policing. What can we do in that? Is there any public part of that? Is there any public input that we need as part of the review of community policing? I think it's going to be a really interesting approach. Yeah, thanks.
So, these last couple of weeks, we've been going around trying to find answers on the potato shoot. I'm sure you're somewhat aware of that.
Mm-hmm.
The press briefing and everything. And when I asked the mayor and Mosley, they told me to go to the DA's office. Stay at the DA's office. Got no answers because this is Juan Colbert's mom. She just found out that this case was closed almost 4 years ago. How does that happen?
I don't have enough information to be able to answer that question.
Is there no sort of, should she have received a phone call or something?
I'd be more than happy to visit after this meeting. I think I've talked to Mike, so we can talk about getting additional information on a case or at cases, if that's what you'd like to do. Okay. Thank you. Other questions?
Just real
Darren?
quick, about the Brady Giglio impact.
Yes.
Kind of touched on that. The initiate a fit for duty screening, is that different than what is done now? And if it isn't, will it be something the FOP will sign off on?
Right. We're in discussions right now with FOP in terms of what our next step will be in Brady Giglio. That discussion of fitness for duty is just one idea that we've talked about so that we can have an assessment we both agree on, the city and the FOP, to determine the circumstances surrounding potential Brady Giglio violation and what impact that could have moving forward. And then that's only as good as the discussions we have with the district attorney going forward. And so we would hope to be able to put some information in front of the district attorney so that he can make a sound call regarding Brady Giglio.
Anything about racial profiling? Anything that surprised you at all in the study?
No, not really.
Anything that needs to be worked on?
Well, there were recommendations. I mean, actually, there's probably, that's better asked of our group.
Yeah, I was going to say, again, it was an extensive process, and we've got a lot of the folks who were involved in it in the room. Does anybody wants to come up and make a comment? Or okay, any questions?
Yeah, I'd like to hear from somebody from the African American community, if that's all right.
Thank you.
First of all, I'd like to say thank you to the city manager and the police chief, and also to our community and all those who are involved in this endeavor, in our city council and mayor. Thank you all. You spoke on the racial profiling. I really enjoyed reading. I've read this before. I've seen this beforehand. And the racial profiling consisting with the fair and impartial policing. And I went to a seminar in Hutchinson, and it is very important that we continue to keep that lifted up for our community to understand the importance between racial profiling and the pretext stops. I think that's very important to relay that to our community, and our community know more about that. I'm particularly delighted to see more emphasis on the body cameras and all the other implementations that they are now doing. And what I heard from the city manager of that this is not the end. Again, I continue to say I thank them that this is not just a one-stop event just to be in front of the cameras, but we are continuing to have dialogue with our community, with our organizations, to be a better city for this great place that we live.
How do you say your name again, sir, and spell it, of course, gives your title?
Kevis Harding, Kevass Harding, Harding.
And what was the church you was in?
Lead pastor, Delrose United Methodist Church.
Okay, we'll wrap up. You're allowed to stay behind and do breakout interviews if you want. Thanks for coming.